What if one of the most important decisions you make today is not actually being made by you? What if that sudden craving for chocolate late at night, that strange feeling in your stomach before an important meeting, that unexplained wave of anxiety, or even the sense that you should trust someone you have just met, did not begin inside your conscious mind? What if the voice you call intuition is not entirely your own? Tonight, we are going to explore a discovery so strange, so unsettling, and yet so scientifically fascinating, that by the end of this journey, you may never think about yourself in quite the same way again. Because hidden deep inside your body is a vast living world, a world populated by trillions of microscopic organisms, a world that communicates with your brain, influences your emotions, shapes your cravings, affects your immune system, and may even help determine how you experience reality itself. Scientists have given this hidden network a remarkable nickname, the second brain. And if what researchers are discovering is true, then the question is no longer whether these invisible inhabitants affect your life. The question is how much of your life they affect. Stay with me until the end of this documentary, because we are going to follow the evidence step by step, from your gut, to your emotions, to your choices, and finally to one of the oldest philosophical questions humanity has ever asked. Who are you? And how much of the person you believe yourself to be is actually under your control? Before we begin, I want to ask a small favor. If you enjoy deep explorations of science, health, consciousness, and the hidden mysteries of everyday life, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. This channel is still in its early stages, and every like, every subscription, and every minute you spend watching genuinely helps us continue creating these long-form journeys into the unknown. Thank you for being here. Now, let us begin. Imagine that it is late at night. The house is quiet. The world outside has fallen asleep. You are sitting alone in the kitchen. You are not hungry. At least, you do not think you are. You ate dinner hours ago. Your body has enough energy. Your stomach should be satisfied. And yet, there it is, a craving, a powerful urge, a voice whispering from somewhere inside. Just one piece of chocolate, just one cookie, just one more bite. You try to ignore it. The urge grows stronger. You distract yourself. It returns. You tell yourself that you are in control. But eventually, you find yourself standing in front of the refrigerator. Not because you consciously decided to, not because you carefully evaluated the nutritional consequences, but because something inside you wanted it badly enough to push your attention toward it. Most of us have experienced moments like this. We rarely stop to ask where those urges come from. We simply assume they are ours. After all, who else could they belong to? Yet science is beginning to reveal something extraordinary. Many of the sensations we experience every day may originate far below the brain, in a place most people never think about, the digestive system. Consider another familiar experience. You are about to walk onto a stage, or enter a job interview, or have a difficult conversation. Before your mind can fully process what is happening, your stomach reacts. A knot forms, a fluttering sensation appears, your digestion changes, your body seems to know something before your conscious awareness catches up. Why? For centuries, people described these experiences using phrases like gut feeling, gut instinct, trust your gut. These expressions appear in cultures all over the world, long before neuroscience existed, long before anyone understood bacteria, neurotransmitters, or neural networks. Human beings somehow sensed that the abdomen was connected to emotions in a profound way, but they could not explain why. Today, for the first time in history, we are beginning to understand the mechanism behind that mystery, and the explanation is far stranger than most people imagine. Inside your digestive tract lives an enormous ecosystem. Not thousands, not millions, not even billions, trillions of living organisms. Tiny creatures so small that entire civilizations could exist on the head of a pin. Most of them are invisible to the naked eye. Many have never been fully studied. Some help protect you, some help feed you, some help train your immune system, and some appear capable of influencing your mood, behavior, and perception in ways scientists are only beginning to uncover. Think about that for a moment. You have never seen them. You have never spoken to them. You have never consciously met them. And yet they have been with you every moment of your life. eating when you eat, growing when you grow, changing as you change, a hidden population living inside your body, a silent civilization operating beneath your awareness. The more researchers investigate this world, the more astonishing it becomes. For decades, scientists viewed bacteria primarily as enemies, invaders, sources of infection and disease, something to destroy, something to eliminate. But that picture was incomplete, very incomplete. What they eventually discovered was that most microorganisms inside the human body are not enemies at all. Many are partners. In fact, life as we know it would be impossible without them. You are not simply a human being carrying a few microbes. You are an entire ecosystem, a living collaboration between human cells and microbial life, an intricate biological alliance that has evolved over millions of years. And like every ecosystem, communication is essential. The organisms inside your gut do not merely exist alongside you. They constantly exchange information with your body. Signals, chemicals, messages, instructions, warnings, requests. A never-ending conversation is taking place within you at this very moment. Most of it happens without your awareness. Yet its effects may shape your daily experience more than you realize. When your gut is healthy, you often feel energetic, focused, emotionally balanced, resilient. When it is disturbed, the effects can ripple throughout the entire body. Energy levels change, sleep changes, mood changes, even the way you think can change. This raises a fascinating possibility. What if the boundary between mind and body is not as clear as we once believed? What if consciousness is not operating from a command center isolated inside the skull? What if the brain is part of a much larger network, a biological conversation involving systems spread throughout the entire body? The idea sounds radical, yet modern research increasingly points in this direction. And nowhere is that connection more mysterious than in the relationship between the brain and the gut. Because deep beneath conscious awareness, hidden behind the ordinary sensations of digestion, there exists a system so sophisticated that many scientists now refer to it as a second brain, a phrase that sounds almost poetic, almost metaphorical. Yet, as we will soon discover, it is much more literal than most people realize. And once you understand the true scale of the hidden world living inside you, the story becomes even more astonishing. Because the second brain is not alone. It is surrounded by a population so vast that it challenges our very definition of what a human being actually is. If another form of intelligence is truly sharing this body with you, then before we can understand its influence, we must first understand its size. And to do that, we need to meet the most crowded world you have ever carried with you. Take a moment and imagine the largest city you have ever seen. Perhaps it is New York. Perhaps it is Tokyo. Perhaps it is a sprawling landscape of light stretching beyond the horizon, filled with millions of people rushing through streets, trains, offices, homes, and marketplaces. Now imagine a city larger than every city on Earth combined. A city so crowded that its population exceeds the number of human beings currently alive on this planet. A city with countless communities, specialized workers, communication networks, supply chains, conflicts, alliances, and systems of cooperation. Now imagine carrying that city with you everywhere you go. Not in a backpack, not in a device, but inside your body, because that is exactly what you're doing right now. As you listen to these words, an invisible civilization is living within you, a civilization made up of microorganisms, tiny living organisms so small that millions can fit on the tip of your finger. Yet together they form one of the most complex ecosystems known to science. For most of human history, we had no idea this world existed. We walked through life believing we were individuals, single organisms, independent beings, one mind, one body, one self. But modern biology has forced us to reconsider that assumption. The deeper scientists look inside the human body, the more they discover that we are not alone. We never were. The collection of microorganisms that inhabit your body is known as the microbiome. And while microbes live on your skin, in your mouth, and throughout many regions of the body, the greatest concentration exists within your digestive tract, particularly in the large intestine. There, in the darkness of your gut, exists an ecosystem of astonishing scale. Researchers estimate that the human body contains tens of trillions of microbial cells. The exact number varies depending on the individual and the methods used to measure them. But regardless of the precise figure, the conclusion remains the same. You are carrying an entire microscopic world within you, and its total weight can reach several pounds. In some people, the combined mass of gut microbes can approach the weight of a human brain. Think about that. A living ecosystem weighing roughly as much as one of the most important organs in your body. An ecosystem composed of thousands of species, each with its own needs, its own chemical abilities, its own role in the larger community. Some microbes specialize in breaking down dietary fiber. Others produce vitamins. Others help regulate inflammation. Others communicate with the immune system. And many remain mysterious. Their functions only partially understood. Scientists are still discovering new species and new interactions. In many ways, we know more about distant galaxies than we know about some of the organisms living inside us. That realization alone is extraordinary. We have sent machines beyond the edges of our solar system. We have mapped the surface of Mars. We have photographed black holes. Yet vast regions of our internal ecosystem remain unexplored. The frontier is not only out there among the stars, it is also within. And the more we learn about this hidden world, the stranger the story becomes. Because the microbiome is not merely a collection of passengers hitching a ride inside your body. It is an active participant in your biology, a dynamic ecosystem constantly interacting with every major system that keeps you alive. To understand how profound this relationship is, we need to examine something even more surprising than the number of microbes themselves: their genetic power. Most people are familiar with the human genome, the complete collection of genetic instructions that help build and maintain the human body. Every human cell carries DNA containing the information needed to produce proteins, regulate biological functions, and guide development. For many years, scientists viewed this genetic blueprint as the defining feature of human life. But then they looked more closely at the microbiome, and what they discovered changed everything. The microbes living inside your body collectively possess far more genes than you do. Not a little more. Not twice as many. Far more. Your human genome contains tens of thousands of genes. The combined genetic library of your microbial inhabitants contains millions. Millions. Imagine a library. One shelf represents human DNA. The rest of the building represents microbial DNA. Suddenly, the relationship looks very different. You are no longer simply a human being carrying bacteria. You are a biological partnership containing an immense reservoir of genetic information. Information that expands your capabilities in ways your own genome never could. Many of the foods humans consume cannot be fully processed without microbial assistance. Certain fibers, for example, pass through much of the digestive system unchanged until microbes begin breaking them down. Without these microbial partners, valuable nutrients and beneficial compounds would remain inaccessible. In a very real sense, your microbiome extends your biological abilities. It performs functions your body alone cannot accomplish efficiently. This has led some scientists to propose a fascinating perspective. Perhaps the human organism should not be viewed as a single species operating independently. Perhaps we should think of ourselves as a superorganism, a collaborative network composed of human cells and microbial cells working together. The idea sounds strange at first, but consider the evidence. Your digestion depends on them. Your immune system depends on them. Your metabolism depends on them. Many aspects of your health depend on them. Remove enough of these microbial partners, and the consequences can be severe. The relationship is so deeply intertwined that separating the human from the microbial becomes increasingly difficult. Where do you end, and where do they begin? The question becomes even more intriguing when we remember that every person carries a unique microbiome. Just as no two fingerprints are identical, no two microbial ecosystems are exactly the same. Your internal world is uniquely yours, shaped by your birth, your environment, your diet, your experiences, your medications, your stress levels, even the people and animals you interact with. Every meal you eat influences this ecosystem, every night of sleep, every period of illness, every course of antibiotics, every major change in lifestyle. The city inside you is constantly evolving. Some populations expand, others decline, new species arrive, old species disappear. The landscape is always changing, and yet most of us remain completely unaware of this process. We wake up, go to work, make decisions, experience emotions, and all the while, an invisible ecosystem is continuously adapting beneath the surface. There is something profoundly humbling about that realization. Human beings often see themselves as separate from nature. We build cities, invent technologies, explore space, and sometimes forget that we are biological creatures. But the microbiome reminds us of a deeper truth. Nature is not merely something outside us. Nature is inside us. Every moment, every breath, every heartbeat, every thought occurs within a body that is itself an ecosystem. You are not standing apart from the natural world. You are one of its most intricate expressions. And perhaps this is where the story begins to shift from biology into philosophy. Because if your body contains trillions of living organisms, if their genes vastly outnumber your own, if they influence processes throughout your body, if they help determine how you extract energy from food, if they shape the chemistry flowing through your bloodstream, then what exactly are you? The traditional image of a human being starts to blur. The boundaries become less clear, less absolute. The word individual begins to feel inadequate. Perhaps we are not solitary creatures after all. Perhaps we are communities, walking ecosystems, living planets, worlds within worlds. Imagine looking down upon Earth from space. From that distance, individual people disappear. Cities become points of light. Countries lose their borders. The planet appears as a single interconnected system. Now imagine shrinking yourself instead of moving farther away. Smaller, smaller, smaller. Until you enter the landscape of the microbiome, you would see countless organisms interacting within a vast biological environment. Rivers of nutrients flowing through complex pathways, chemical messages traveling between communities. Entire populations rising and falling in response to changing conditions. An ecosystem every bit as dynamic as a rainforest or coral reef. And at the center of it all, a human being. Or perhaps not the center. Perhaps merely one participant among many. Which brings us to a startling possibility. If the body is a planet, then the human may be only one of its inhabitants. Not the sole resident, not the only voice, but part of a much larger living system. That idea is fascinating. It is also slightly unsettling, because if trillions of microscopic organisms are sharing this biological world with us, and if they are so deeply integrated into our lives, then an even bigger question emerges. How can creatures so small possibly influence something as complex as human thought, emotion, and behavior? To answer that question, we must journey deeper into the body, toward a hidden network of neurons stretching through the digestive system. A network so sophisticated that scientists have spent decades referring to it by a remarkable name. The second brain. Imagine waking up tomorrow morning and discovering that there is another brain inside your body. Not a metaphor, not a poetic description, not a spiritual idea. An actual network of neurons, a genuine nervous system, a structure capable of sensing, processing information, making decisions, and controlling complex biological functions without asking your conscious mind for permission. It sounds like science fiction. Yet for more than a century, scientists have known that something remarkably close to this already exists inside every human being. Hidden beneath the lungs, beneath the heart, deep within the twisting landscape of the digestive tract. A secret neural network stretches from the esophagus all the way to the colon. Millions upon millions of nerve cells woven together in an intricate web, watching, responding, calculating, adapting, working every second of every day, even while you sleep, even while you dream, even while you remain completely unaware of its existence. Scientists call this network the enteric nervous system, or ENS, and it may be one of the most extraordinary structures in the human body. To understand why, we first need to appreciate its scale. The human brain is often described as the most complex object in the known universe. Containing approximately 86 billion neurons, it serves as the command center for perception, memory, language, movement, emotion, and consciousness. Compared to that enormous number, the enteric nervous system appears much smaller. It contains more than 500 million neurons. At first glance, that may not sound impressive. 500 million is far less than 86 billion. But numbers can be deceptive. 500 million neurons is still an astonishing amount of neural tissue. In fact, the enteric nervous system contains more neurons than many animals possess in their entire nervous systems. This is not a simple collection of wires. It is not merely a relay station passing messages from one location to another. It is a sophisticated neural network capable of performing complex tasks on its own. That distinction is important because for many years, scientists assumed the digestive system simply followed instructions sent by the brain. The brain commands, the gut obeys. That seemed logical. After all, we tend to imagine the brain as the supreme authority within the body, the unquestioned ruler, the central commander. But as researchers examined the enteric nervous system more closely, a different picture began to emerge. The gut was not merely receiving instructions. In many situations, it was making decisions independently. Imagine a large corporation. Most people assume every action must be approved by the chief executive officer. But in reality, departments often operate on their own. Managers make local decisions. Problems are solved without consulting headquarters. The organization becomes more efficient because not every detail requires central supervision. The enteric nervous system works in a similar way. Instead of sending every digestive task to the brain for approval, it handles countless operations locally, automatically, continuously, independently. This is one reason digestion remains functional even when communication with the brain is disrupted. The system possesses its own internal intelligence, its own ability to monitor conditions and coordinate responses, its own neural circuits. And that realization fundamentally changed how scientists viewed the digestive tract. The gut was not simply a tube for processing food. It was a sensory organ, a decision-making system, a neural network, a second brain. But what exactly does this second brain do? The answer begins with movement. Every meal you consume embarks on an extraordinary journey through the digestive tract. Food must be pushed forward, mixed with digestive fluids, broken down into nutrients, separated from waste, transported through multiple specialized environments. All of this requires precise coordination. If movement is too fast, nutrients cannot be absorbed properly. If movement is too slow, problems arise elsewhere. The timing must be remarkably accurate. The enteric nervous system manages this process through rhythmic contractions known as peristalsis. Wave-like motions travel through the digestive tract, moving food from one location to the next. These contractions occur automatically. You do not consciously command them. You do not wake up each morning and tell your intestines how fast to move breakfast through the digestive system. The enteric nervous system handles that task for you, quietly, efficiently, without requiring attention. Yet movement is only part of the story. The digestive tract is also one of the most chemically active environments in the body. Different foods require different digestive strategies. Proteins, fats, carbohydrates, fiber. Each presents unique challenges. To process them effectively, the body releases an astonishing variety of enzymes and digestive compounds. The timing of these releases must be carefully controlled. Too little enzyme production can impair digestion. Too much can damage tissues. The enteric nervous system constantly monitors conditions and helps regulate these secretions. It gathers information, analyzes local circumstances, adjusts biological responses, all in real time, and it does so without conscious awareness. Imagine managing a vast industrial complex, thousands of chemical reactions, millions of moving components, constant changes in supply and demand. That is essentially what the enteric nervous system oversees every day. But perhaps its most remarkable ability involves sensing the environment, because the digestive tract is not isolated from the outside world. In a sense, it is part of the outside world. Everything you eat, everything you drink, every microorganism that enters through your mouth eventually passes through this system. The digestive tract serves as one of the body's primary points of contact with the external environment. As a result, the enteric nervous system must constantly evaluate incoming information. What nutrients are present? Are harmful substances entering the system? Is inflammation occurring? Are microbial populations changing? Is the environment safe? Or does it require a defensive response? The gut is continuously gathering data, continuously monitoring conditions, continuously adapting. And this is where the story becomes even more fascinating, because the enteric nervous system is not operating in isolation. It exists within the microbial metropolis we explored in the previous chapter. Trillions of microorganisms occupy the same environment. Their chemical activities influence local conditions. Their populations rise and fall. Their signals interact with the nervous system. A vast biological conversation unfolds every moment. Neurons communicating with microbes. Microbes influencing neurons. A partnership millions of years in the making. The deeper scientists investigate this relationship, the more they realize that the digestive tract may represent one of the most important information processing centers in the body. Which explains why many researchers began using an unusual phrase, the second brain. At first, some scientists resisted the label. They worried it sounded exaggerated, sensational, misleading. After all, the enteric nervous system does not write poetry. It does not solve mathematical equations. It does not create art. It does not generate conscious thought in the way the brain does. Yet, the phrase persisted, because despite these differences, the similarities were impossible to ignore. The enteric nervous system contains neurons. It uses many of the same neurotransmitters found in the brain. It processes information. It coordinates responses. It learns from experience. And perhaps most importantly, it operates with a degree of independence that few expected. The digestive tract was not simply obeying commands. It possessed its own neural authority, its own local intelligence, its own ability to interpret and respond to the world around it. The implications were profound. For centuries, Western culture placed the mind in the head and treated the rest of the body as a supporting structure. Thought lived above, the body followed below. But the enteric nervous system challenged that hierarchy. Suddenly, the gut appeared less like a passive organ and more like an active participant in the creation of human experience. And if that sounds abstract, consider how often your digestive system seems to know something before your conscious mind does. The knot in your stomach before bad news. The sinking feeling when danger approaches. The butterflies before a life-changing moment. The sensation that something feels wrong before you can explain why. For generations, people dismissed these experiences as metaphors. Today, scientists are beginning to view them differently. Perhaps these sensations reflect real biological communication. Perhaps the gut is not merely reacting. Perhaps it is informing. Perhaps part of what we call intuition originates from neural processes unfolding far below conscious awareness. That possibility is both exciting and unsettling. Because if another brain exists within us, if it continuously gathers information, if it constantly evaluates the environment, if it influences digestion, immunity, metabolism, and potentially emotion, then one question becomes unavoidable. How does it communicate with the brain inside our skull? After all, no brain can function entirely alone. Every intelligence requires a network, a channel, a pathway through which information flows. And hidden within the body is exactly such a connection, a biological highway linking the world of the gut to the world of the mind. A communication route so important that it may help explain why your emotions, instincts, and physical sensations are often inseparable. Because a second brain may exist within you. But a brain cannot operate without conversation. And the next chapter of our journey begins with the remarkable connection that allows these two worlds to speak. Imagine two distant civilizations trying to survive on the same planet. One lives in the skies, the other lives deep beneath the surface. Each gathers information, each faces different challenges, each possesses its own form of intelligence, but neither can thrive alone. To survive, they must communicate. They must exchange information constantly. Warnings, updates, requests, instructions. Without communication, confusion follows. Without communication, coordination collapses. Without communication, even the most sophisticated systems begin to fail. Now imagine that those two civilizations exist inside your body. One is the brain inside your skull. The other is the vast neural and microbial world hidden within your digestive system. For decades, scientists knew these two regions were connected. What they did not fully understand was just how much information flowed between them. Today, we know that this communication network is one of the most important biological systems in the human body. And at the center of that network lies a remarkable structure known as the vagus nerve. If the internet connects cities across continents, the vagus nerve connects worlds inside you. If fiber optic cables carry information across oceans, the vagus nerve carries information across the landscape of your body. It is, in many ways, the biological internet of the human organism. a living communication highway, a neural superhighway, a constant stream of information flowing between the gut and the brain. The name itself comes from the Latin word for wandering, and that description is surprisingly accurate. Unlike many nerves that serve specific regions, the vagus nerve travels extensively throughout the body. It extends from the brainstem and branches into multiple organs: the heart, the lungs, the digestive tract, and many other systems essential to life. Its reach is so broad that some scientists describe it as one of the body's primary communication networks, a master connector linking distant regions into a coordinated whole. For a long time, researchers assumed this network primarily carried commands from the brain downward. The brain gives instructions, the body follows. That seemed reasonable. After all, this mirrors the way most people think about themselves. The conscious mind sits at the top. Everything else responds. But then scientists began measuring the actual flow of information. And what they discovered was astonishing. Roughly 90% of the signals traveling through the vagus nerve move upward, from the body to the brain. Only a small fraction move downward from the brain to the body. Let that sink in for a moment. The majority of communication is not the brain speaking, it is the brain listening. For generations, we imagined the brain as a king issuing orders to loyal subjects. Modern neuroscience suggests a different picture. The brain may be spending much of its time receiving reports from the body, monitoring conditions, gathering updates, adjusting its responses based on incoming information. In other words, the brain is not always commanding. Often it is listening. And one of the loudest voices in that conversation comes from the gut. Every second of every day, information rises from the digestive system toward the brain. Messages about nutrients, messages about inflammation, messages about microbial activity, messages about stress, messages about the internal environment. Your gut is constantly reporting on the state of the world beneath conscious awareness. Most of these signals never enter conscious thought. You do not feel individual nerve impulses traveling through the vagus nerve. You do not notice countless biological updates arriving in your brain every moment. Yet those signals help shape your experience of reality. Imagine sitting in the control room of a massive spacecraft. Thousands of sensors monitor every system: fuel levels, temperature, oxygen, structural integrity, navigation. The captain cannot personally inspect every component. Instead, information arrives through monitoring systems. The quality of those reports influences every decision. Your brain operates in a similar way. It relies on incoming data, and much of that data originates far below the neck. This realization changes how we think about emotion. Most people assume feelings originate entirely within the brain. But what if emotions are partially constructed from information arriving from the body? What if the brain is continuously interpreting signals from internal organs? What if your emotional state reflects not only your thoughts, but also the condition of your biological environment? This idea may sound surprising, yet growing evidence suggests it is true. When your digestive system is functioning smoothly, one set of signals travels upward. When inflammation increases, another pattern emerges. When microbial communities change, communication patterns shift. The brain receives this information and integrates it into its broader understanding of your condition. The result may influence mood, energy, motivation, stress responses, and even decision-making. The boundary between physical sensation and psychological experience begins to blur. This may help explain why emotional experiences often feel physical. Anxiety is not merely a thought. You feel it in your chest, your stomach, your muscles. Fear accelerates the heart. Stress affects digestion. Excitement produces butterflies. Grief creates heaviness. The body and mind are deeply interconnected because they are constantly exchanging information, and the vagus nerve is one of the primary pathways that makes this possible. Consider those famous butterflies in the stomach. Nearly everyone has experienced them. Before a first date, before a speech, before an important life event, something happens in the abdomen, a fluttering sensation, a feeling of movement, an awareness that seems to emerge from deep inside. For centuries, people treated this sensation as a poetic metaphor. Today, science offers a different perspective. The sensation may reflect real physiological communication between the gut and the brain, a biological conversation becoming visible to conscious awareness. Perhaps this is one reason nearly every culture has developed expressions involving the gut. Trust your gut. Gut feeling. Gut instinct. Listen to your gut. These phrases appeared long before neuroscience, long before researchers identified the enteric nervous system, long before anyone knew about neurotransmitters or microbial signaling. Yet somehow people sensed that important information was coming from below. Now modern science is beginning to reveal why. The body may be processing information before conscious awareness catches up. The gut detects patterns. The nervous system responds. Signals travel upward. And only later does the conscious mind create a narrative explaining what happened. This possibility raises a fascinating question. How many of our decisions begin below awareness? Imagine meeting someone for the first time. Within seconds, you form an impression. You like them. You distrust them. You feel comfortable. You feel uneasy. Most people assume these judgments originate entirely in conscious reasoning. But neuroscience suggests much of the process occurs beneath awareness. The brain continuously integrates enormous amounts of information: facial expressions, body language, tone of voice, environmental cues, internal bodily signals. The conscious mind receives the final result, not necessarily the entire calculation. In that sense, intuition may not be magic. It may be biology, not supernatural knowledge, but information processing occurring beyond conscious awareness. And because the gut is one of the body's largest sensory systems, its signals may contribute more to this process than we once imagined. Of course, intuition is not infallible. Gut feelings can be wrong, biases exist, emotions distort perception. The point is not that every instinct should be trusted blindly. The point is that instincts may have a physical foundation, a biological origin, a neural pathway, a communication network linking the hidden world inside your body with the conscious experience you call your mind. And perhaps that is what makes this discovery so profound. The traditional image of the human being often separates thought from biology, mind from body, reason from instinct. But the vagus nerve reminds us that these categories are deeply intertwined. Every thought emerges from a biological system. Every emotion reflects physical processes. Every moment of awareness depends on information flowing through networks we rarely notice. You are not a brain riding inside a body. You are an integrated organism, a conversation, a continuous exchange of signals between countless systems working together. And nowhere is that conversation more active than between the gut and the brain. The second brain is not isolated. It is connected, constantly speaking, constantly reporting, constantly influencing the larger story unfolding within you. Which brings us to an even deeper mystery. If the gut is continuously sending information to the brain, what exactly is it saying? What messages are traveling upward every second? What signals are shaping mood, motivation, and emotional experience? And perhaps most importantly, what substances are being produced inside the gut that allow this communication to occur in the first place? Because the next chapter of our journey reveals something that sounds almost impossible. Many of the chemicals we associate with happiness, motivation, calmness, and emotional well-being may not primarily originate in the brain at all. Their story begins somewhere else, deep within the hidden world of the gut. Imagine waking up one morning and discovering that the factory responsible for much of your happiness is not located where you thought it was. For most of modern history, people have associated emotions with the brain. Joy belongs to the brain. Sadness belongs to the brain. Motivation belongs to the brain. Anxiety belongs to the brain. Happiness belongs to the brain. The brain has become the symbolic headquarters of the human experience. And to a large extent, that idea is correct. Every emotion we consciously experience is ultimately processed within the nervous system. But what if some of the raw materials used to create those emotions originate somewhere else? What if part of the story begins much farther down, deep within the twisting landscape of the digestive tract, deep within the hidden world of the microbiome, deep within the second brain? Because one of the most surprising discoveries in modern biology is that the gut is not simply involved in digestion. It is also deeply involved in chemistry, not the chemistry of food alone, the chemistry of mood, the chemistry of motivation, the chemistry of emotion itself. And perhaps no molecule illustrates this better than serotonin. You have probably heard serotonin described as the happiness chemical. That description is somewhat simplified, but it contains an important truth. Serotonin plays a critical role in regulating mood, emotional stability, sleep, appetite, learning, memory, and overall well-being. When serotonin signaling functions properly, people often experience greater emotional balance. When serotonin systems become disrupted, the consequences can affect both mental and physical health. For decades, most people assumed serotonin was primarily a brain chemical. After all, discussions about serotonin usually occur in conversations about psychology, depression, and mental health. But then scientists uncovered a fact that surprised even many researchers. The overwhelming majority of serotonin in the body is not produced in the brain. It is produced in the gut. Depending on the measurement and biological context, roughly 90 to 95% of the body's serotonin originates within the digestive system. Think about that for a moment. One of the most important molecules associated with emotional regulation is largely manufactured far below the skull, not inside the cerebral cortex, not inside the regions responsible for conscious thought, but inside the digestive tract. At first, this seems almost impossible. How can something associated with mood be produced in the gut? The answer reveals just how interconnected the body truly is. The digestive system is not an isolated organ. It is part of a communication network, a biological ecosystem linked to the brain through nerves, hormones, immune signals, and microbial activity. The serotonin produced in the gut does not simply stay there. Its influence extends throughout the body, helping regulate digestion, supporting communication between systems, contributing to the larger chemical environment that shapes human experience. And serotonin is only the beginning. Because once scientists began investigating the chemistry of the gut, they discovered something even more remarkable. The digestive system participates in the production, regulation, or influence of many compounds associated with emotional states. Compounds that help determine how energetic, calm, motivated, focused, or resilient we feel. The gut was beginning to look less like a digestive organ and more like a biochemical command center, a factory, a manufacturing hub, a producer of signals capable of influencing the entire organism. Consider dopamine. Dopamine is often described as the molecule of motivation. Again, that label is an oversimplification, but it captures part of the story. Dopamine helps drive goal-directed behavior. Curiosity, reward-seeking, learning, anticipation, the excitement of pursuing something meaningful. When dopamine systems function properly, they help us engage with the world. When disrupted, motivation can suffer. Researchers have discovered that the gut and its microbial inhabitants play important roles in pathways connected to dopamine production and regulation. The relationship is complex. Scientists are still uncovering the details, but the message is becoming increasingly clear. The microbiome is not merely digesting food. It is influencing the chemical language through which the body communicates. Then there is GABA, a neurotransmitter often associated with calmness and relaxation. GABA helps regulate neural activity. It acts as a braking system, preventing excessive excitation within the nervous system. Without sufficient inhibitory signaling, stress and anxiety can become more difficult to manage. Remarkably, certain gut microbes appear capable of producing compounds related to GABA signaling. Again, the science continues to evolve. Researchers are still exploring exactly how these mechanisms affect human behavior. But the direction of the evidence is fascinating. The microbiome may be participating in the creation of chemical conditions that influence how calm or stressed we feel. Imagine that. Tiny organisms living inside the digestive tract, potentially contributing to the biochemical environment associated with emotional experience. The story grows even more extraordinary when we consider the countless other molecules involved. Short-chain fatty acids, metabolic byproducts, immune signaling compounds, neuroactive chemicals, microbial metabolites. An immense chemical conversation unfolds continuously within the body. Millions of messages, millions of interactions, millions of biological decisions. Every day, every hour, every minute, and all of these processes converge within a larger framework known as the gut-brain axis. The gut-brain axis is not a single structure. It is not one nerve, not one organ, not one pathway. It is a communication network linking the digestive system and the nervous system. A two-way conversation involving the vagus nerve, hormones, immune signals, microbial metabolites, and countless biochemical messengers. Think of it as a vast information exchange system. The gut sends reports upward, the brain sends responses downward. Information flows continuously in both directions. Changes in emotional state can affect digestion. Changes in digestion can affect emotional state. Stress can alter microbial communities. Microbial changes can influence signaling patterns. Everything is connected. The gut-brain axis reminds us that the body does not operate as separate departments. The nervous system, the digestive system, the immune system, the endocrine system, they are all part of one integrated network. And nowhere is that integration more visible than in the relationship between food and mood. Have you ever noticed how differently you feel after different meals? Some foods leave you energized, others leave you sluggish. Some support mental clarity, others seem to cloud your thinking. Many people assume these effects result solely from calories or blood sugar. Those factors matter, but they are only part of the story. Every meal also influences the microbiome. Every meal changes the environment inside the digestive tract. Every meal affects which microbial populations thrive and which decline. And because those populations participate in chemical signaling, dietary choices can create effects that extend far beyond digestion. What you eat becomes part of the ecosystem, and the ecosystem influences the signals traveling throughout the body. This realization forces us to rethink a familiar phrase: you are what you eat. Perhaps that statement is more accurate than we ever imagined, because what you eat does not simply become part of your body, it becomes part of the world living inside your body, and that world may influence how you feel. Imagine feeding a rainforest. The species that receive resources flourish, their populations grow, their influence expands. Now imagine neglecting that rainforest. Diversity declines, balance disappears, the ecosystem changes. The same principle applies within the gut. Food is not merely fuel for you, it is fuel for an entire biological community, and that community participates in shaping the chemical landscape of your body. The implications are profound. For centuries, people separated physical health from mental health. Doctors treated the body, philosophers discussed the mind, psychologists studied emotions, nutrition focused on digestion. Each field occupied its own territory. But the gut-brain axis reveals something different. The borders are largely imaginary. Mind and body are deeply intertwined. The food on your plate may influence the microbes in your gut. The microbes in your gut may influence chemical signaling. Chemical signaling may influence emotional experience, and emotional experience may influence behavior. Suddenly, a simple meal becomes part of a much larger story, a story connecting biology, psychology, behavior, and identity. And perhaps that is the most astonishing realization of all. Your mood may not begin in your mind. It may begin with the ecosystem living inside you, the breakfast you skipped, the fiber you consumed, the microbial populations you nourished, the chemical signals those microbes help generate, the biological conversations unfolding beneath awareness. The boundaries between food and feeling become surprisingly difficult to separate. Which leads us to an even more unsettling question. If microorganisms can influence chemical pathways associated with happiness, if they can participate in signaling networks linked to stress, motivation, and emotional regulation, if they can help shape the biological environment from which moods emerge, then how far does their influence extend? Can microbes affect behavior itself? Can they influence choices? Can they alter personality? Can tiny organisms living within us change the way we interact with the world? At first, such questions sound absurd, almost impossible. Yet some of the most surprising experiments in modern science suggest that the answer may be far more complicated than we once believed. Because the next chapter of our journey introduces a possibility that borders on the unbelievable. What if certain microbes are not merely influencing how you feel? What if they are helping shape what you do? Imagine that scientists could change your personality, not through years of therapy, not through education, not through life experience, not through medication, but through something far stranger, a transfer of microbes. At first, that idea sounds ridiculous. Personality feels deeply personal. It feels permanent. It feels like one of the defining features of who we are. Some people are adventurous, others are cautious. Some are naturally outgoing, others prefer solitude. Some walk confidently into uncertainty. Others hesitate before every decision. Most of us assume these traits belong entirely to us. They are part of our identity, part of our character, part of our unique psychological makeup. But modern research into the gut microbiome has produced findings that force us to ask an uncomfortable question. What if personality is more flexible than we think? And what if some of the forces shaping behavior originate far below conscious awareness? To explore that possibility, we need to enter one of the most fascinating areas of modern science, a field that sits at the intersection of neuroscience, psychology, microbiology, and behavior. A field that investigates whether microbes can influence the mind. And the story begins with a mouse. Actually, two mice. Imagine two animals raised under different conditions. One appears bold, curious, willing to explore unfamiliar environments. The other appears cautious, nervous, reluctant to take risks. When placed in a new setting, the timid mouse hesitates. The adventurous mouse moves forward. At first glance, these differences seem straightforward. One mouse is brave, the other is shy. Perhaps genetics explains the difference. Perhaps early experiences shape their personalities. But researchers decided to ask a very different question. What role might the microbiome play? Could the invisible ecosystem living inside these animals contribute to their behavior? To investigate, scientists conducted a series of experiments involving microbiome transfers. The idea was surprisingly simple. Transfer gut microbes from one animal to another, then observe what happens. The results stunned researchers. In some studies, behavioral traits appeared to shift along with the transferred microbiome. Animals that previously behaved in one way began displaying characteristics associated with the donor animals. Timid mice sometimes became more exploratory, more willing to investigate new environments, more confident in situations they had previously avoided. Meanwhile, other behavioral patterns changed in ways scientists did not fully expect. The implications were extraordinary. The animals had not received new brains, their genes had not been rewritten. Their memories remained intact, and yet their behavior changed. Something within the gut appeared capable of influencing the way the brain responded to the world. Now, before we go any further, it is important to be careful. These studies do not prove that microbes directly control personality. Human behavior is vastly more complicated than mouse behavior. Personality emerges from genetics, upbringing, culture, relationships, experiences, and countless biological factors. No serious scientist believes that bacteria alone determine who you are. But these experiments revealed something equally important. The microbiome may contribute to behavioral tendencies in ways we never previously imagined. The gut was no longer just influencing digestion. It appeared capable of influencing the brain. And once that possibility entered scientific discussion, an entirely new field began to emerge. Researchers started using a fascinating term: psychobiotics. The word combines psychology and probiotics. It refers to microorganisms and microbial activities that may influence mental processes, emotional states, and behavior. The concept remains relatively young. Many questions remain unanswered. But the field has attracted enormous interest because it challenges traditional assumptions about the mind. For generations, psychology focused primarily on the brain, neurons, synapses, thought patterns, cognitive processes, all important subjects. But psychobiotics introduced a radical possibility. Perhaps some psychological processes begin outside the brain. Perhaps the microbiome helps shape the environment in which the brain operates. Perhaps the mind is influenced by biological partners we rarely notice. To understand how this might happen, we must address a common misunderstanding. When people hear these findings, they sometimes imagine bacteria as tiny, intelligent beings plotting strategies inside the body, tiny puppet masters pulling invisible strings. That image is entertaining, but it is not accurate. Bacteria do not possess human consciousness. They do not sit around making plans. They do not form intentions the way people do. They are not secretly discussing how to manipulate your decisions. The reality is both less dramatic and more fascinating. Microbes influence the body through chemistry, not conscious planning, not deliberate control. Chemistry. Every living organism changes its environment. Plants release chemicals into soil. Animals release hormones. Microbes produce metabolic byproducts. These substances influence surrounding systems. The microbiome functions in much the same way. As microbes grow, consume nutrients, and interact with one another, they produce countless chemical compounds. Some of these compounds affect inflammation. Some influence immune activity. Some interact with the nervous system. Some alter signaling pathways connected to mood and behavior. The result is not mind control, it is environmental influence. Imagine a city. The behavior of its citizens depends partly on the environment around them: lighting, noise, air quality, safety, resources, infrastructure. People respond to conditions. Similarly, neurons operate within a biological environment. If that environment changes, neural activity can change. If neural activity changes, behavior may change. This is where the microbiome enters the story. Not as a conscious controller, but as a powerful environmental force, a force capable of influencing the conditions under which the brain functions. And that realization leads to a fascinating philosophical question. How much of what we call personality is fixed? Most people think of personality as a solid structure, a permanent identity, something stable, something enduring. But biology paints a different picture. Your body changes continuously. Cells die and are replaced. Proteins are rebuilt. Neural connections strengthen and weaken. Hormone levels fluctuate. Immune activity changes. Microbial populations shift. The organism is constantly evolving. Perhaps personality is less like a statue and more like a river. It has continuity. It remains recognizable, yet it is always changing, always adapting, always responding to internal and external influences. The microbiome may be one of those influences. Not the only influence, not the dominant influence, but one piece of a much larger puzzle. And that possibility becomes even more intriguing when we consider everyday human experiences. Think about periods of your life when you felt unusually energetic, optimistic, confident. Then compare them with periods when you felt anxious, unmotivated, emotionally exhausted. Many factors likely contributed: relationships, sleep, stress, health, environment. But perhaps hidden biological changes played a role as well. Perhaps the ecosystem within you was changing. Perhaps invisible processes were subtly influencing how the world felt, not determining your choices, not removing free will, but nudging the probabilities, shaping the background conditions in which decisions were made. If that idea feels unsettling, you are not alone. Many people instinctively resist it. We prefer to believe that our thoughts emerge entirely from conscious intention, that we are the sole authors of our behavior, that our personalities belong exclusively to us. Yet science repeatedly reveals that human beings are more interconnected than we imagine. Genes influence us, hormones influence us, sleep influences us, nutrition influences us, social relationships influence us, and now evidence suggests that microbial ecosystems may influence us as well. The self becomes less isolated, less independent, more relational, more interconnected, more deeply embedded within biology. And perhaps that is the most important lesson of all. The microbiome does not diminish human identity. It expands our understanding of it. It reminds us that being human is not a solitary process. We are ecosystems, networks, collaborations between countless systems working together. The mind emerges not from a single source, but from layers of interaction. Neurons, hormones, immune cells, microbes, all participating in the creation of experience. And if tiny organisms can influence emotional resilience, if they can contribute to confidence or caution, if they can affect the biological environment in which behavior emerges, then another question naturally follows. One that may be even more relevant to everyday life. Because while most people rarely think about courage, everyone thinks about food. Everyone knows what it feels like to crave something, to suddenly want sugar, to want junk food, to want one more snack despite having eaten enough already, which raises a remarkable possibility. If microbes can influence the chemistry connected to behavior, if they can affect how an animal responds to fear, if they can help shape emotional tendencies, then could they also influence hunger? Could they influence cravings? Could the urge for certain foods sometimes originate from the ecosystem living inside you? And if so, who is really making the request when that craving suddenly appears? Think back to the last time you promised yourself you would eat healthier. Maybe it happened on a Sunday evening. You looked at your kitchen, you looked at your reflection, and you made a simple decision. Tomorrow will be different. More vegetables, less sugar, less processed food, more self-control. The plan felt solid, logical, reasonable. You genuinely meant it. Then tomorrow arrived. Everything went well until late afternoon. A stressful meeting, a difficult conversation, a long day. And suddenly, without warning, an intense craving appeared. Not for broccoli, not for beans, not for a bowl of fresh vegetables. You wanted something sweet, something salty, something rich, something that seemed impossible to resist. Perhaps a donut, perhaps a chocolate bar, perhaps a greasy fast food meal. At first, you negotiated with yourself, then you justified it, then you gave in. And afterward, you asked the same question millions of people ask every day. Why is this so hard? Why do cravings feel stronger than logic? Why can a decision made in the morning collapse by evening? Most people explain this as a failure of willpower, a weakness of discipline, a lack of motivation. Sometimes that explanation is partially true, but modern science suggests another possibility. What if the battle is not happening entirely inside your conscious mind? What if another force is participating? A force hidden deep within the ecosystem of your gut. Because one of the most fascinating discoveries in microbiome research involves a question that affects every human being on Earth. Who is really hungry? At first, the answer seems obvious. You are. Your body needs energy. Your brain recognizes that need. You eat. Simple. Except the reality is far more complicated. Remember the invisible city we explored earlier, the trillions of microorganisms living inside your digestive tract. Those organisms are alive. They require resources. They compete for nutrients. They grow, they reproduce, they form communities, and like every living thing, they need food. The challenge is that different microbial species prefer different food sources. Some thrive on dietary fiber, others flourish when they receive complex plant compounds. Some benefit from fermented foods. Others prefer sugars and rapidly digestible carbohydrates. Each group survives best under specific conditions. And because the microbiome functions as an ecosystem, the balance between these groups is constantly shifting. Imagine a rainforest. When environmental conditions change, certain species expand while others decline. The same process occurs inside your gut. Every meal changes the landscape. Every snack alters the environment. Every dietary pattern influences which microbial populations gain an advantage. Over time, the foods you repeatedly consume help determine which organisms become dominant. And this is where the story becomes truly fascinating. Because dominant microbial populations do not simply sit quietly and enjoy their preferred nutrients. They influence the biological environment around them. They produce chemical signals. They alter metabolic activity. They participate in communication networks connected to the gut-brain axis. In other words, they help shape the conditions under which cravings emerge. Now, this does not mean microbes are consciously demanding pizza or ice cream. They are not tiny creatures shouting orders from inside your intestines. The reality is more subtle, and perhaps more powerful. When certain microbial populations flourish, they can influence the production of signaling molecules associated with appetite, reward, metabolism, and satiety. These signals become part of the ongoing conversation between the gut and the brain. Gradually, preferences can emerge. Patterns can develop. Certain foods begin to feel unusually appealing. Others seem less satisfying. The result is not direct control. It is influence. But influence, repeated thousands of times, can be remarkably powerful. Think about how habits form. Most habits do not emerge from a single dramatic event. They develop through small nudges repeated over time. A tiny preference becomes a routine. A routine becomes a lifestyle. A lifestyle becomes part of identity. Microbial influences may operate in a similar way. Not as dictators, but as persistent voices in the background, voices that can slowly shape behavior. This may help explain why sugar cravings can feel so overwhelming. From an evolutionary perspective, humans evolved in environments where concentrated sugar was relatively rare. Sweet foods provided valuable energy. The brain learned to view them as rewarding. Modern food manufacturers have taken advantage of this ancient system. Highly processed foods are often designed to maximize reward. Sugar, fat, salt, texture, flavor, everything engineered to encourage repeated consumption. When these foods become dietary staples, they do not only affect human biology, they affect microbial ecosystems as well. Certain microbial populations thrive under these conditions, and as they expand, they may contribute to biological signals that encourage similar eating patterns in the future. The cycle reinforces itself. The foods influence the microbiome. The microbiome influences signaling. The signaling influences behavior. The behavior influences future food choices. Round and round the cycle goes. Many people recognize this pattern intuitively. They notice that after several days of eating highly processed foods, cravings intensify. The desire becomes stronger, more persistent, more difficult to ignore. Conversely, people who transition to diets rich in vegetables, fruits, legumes, and whole foods often report something surprising. After a period of adjustment, cravings begin to change. Foods that once seemed irresistible lose some of their power. Healthier options become more appealing. The biological landscape shifts, and with it, the experience of hunger itself. Of course, appetite is influenced by many factors beyond the microbiome. Sleep, stress, hormones, physical activity, emotional state, social environment, all play important roles. Human behavior is always more complicated than a single explanation. But the microbiome appears to be one piece of the puzzle, an invisible participant influencing the conversation. And perhaps nowhere is this more obvious than during moments of emotional eating. Imagine a stressful day. Your nervous system becomes activated. Stress hormones rise. The gut-brain axis responds. Microbial activity shifts. Appetite changes. Suddenly, comfort foods seem more attractive. Not because you consciously analyze their nutritional value, but because multiple biological systems converge toward the same outcome. The craving feels personal. Yet beneath awareness, an entire network of processes contributed to its creation. This realization can be strangely liberating. Many people blame themselves for every craving, every setback, every dietary struggle. They assume the problem reflects weakness, laziness, poor character. But biology tells a more nuanced story. The human organism is not a machine controlled solely by conscious thought. It is a living ecosystem, an ecosystem containing countless competing influences. When cravings arise, they do not emerge from nowhere. They emerge from a complex interaction between the brain, hormones, emotions, environment, and microbiome. Understanding this does not eliminate personal responsibility, but it does replace shame with understanding. It allows us to see behavior more clearly, to recognize that self-control is not simply a battle between virtue and weakness. Often it is a negotiation between different biological forces, different systems, different signals, different needs. And perhaps that is why changing dietary habits can feel so difficult at first. When you alter your eating patterns, you are not merely changing what you eat. You are reshaping an ecosystem. Imagine changing the climate of an entire continent. Some species flourish, others struggle. The transition takes time. The microbiome must adapt. New communities must establish themselves. New biological patterns must emerge. Patience becomes essential, because ecosystems rarely transform overnight. The deeper scientists study this process, the clearer one truth becomes. Hunger is not always a simple request for calories. Sometimes it is information. Sometimes it is habit. Sometimes it is emotion. Sometimes it is biology speaking through chemistry. And occasionally, the craving you experience may reflect the needs of organisms living alongside you. Not because they are controlling you, but because they are participating in the conversation. Which leads to a thought that is both fascinating and slightly unsettling. There may be days when you believe you are choosing a particular food, yet countless invisible influences have already shaped that decision long before it reaches conscious awareness. There may be days when the craving feels like your own voice, but in reality, it is the echo of an entire ecosystem speaking through the language of biology. There may even be days when you do not choose the food chooses you. Yet, as remarkable as this influence may be, the microbiome's role extends far beyond mood and appetite. Its reach touches another system so important that your survival depends on it every moment. A system standing guard between you and the outside world. A biological fortress that protects your body from countless threats. And surprisingly, much of that fortress is located in exactly the same place where trillions of microbes reside, deep within the gut. For most of your life, you have probably thought of your immune system as an army, a vast network of defenders patrolling the body, white blood cells acting like soldiers, antibodies functioning like weapons, invaders arriving, defenders responding, a battle between health and disease. It is a useful image, but it is incomplete, because an army cannot protect a nation without borders. Before a country can defend itself, It must first know where it ends. It must know who is allowed to enter, who must be stopped, who belongs, and who does not. Without borders, even the strongest military eventually fails. Surprisingly, the same principle applies to the human body, and one of the most important borders you possess is not your skin. It is your gut. Deep inside your digestive tract exists a biological frontier unlike anything else in the body. A frontier where the outside world meets the inside world. A frontier where food, microbes, chemicals, and foreign substances arrive every single day. A frontier that must make countless decisions every second. What should be welcomed? What should be rejected? What should be tolerated? What should be attacked? This hidden frontier is so important that a remarkable proportion of immune activity is connected to it. Researchers estimate that approximately 70 to 80% of immune function is associated with the gut and its surrounding immune tissues. Think about that for a moment. The majority of the body's immune activity is connected, directly or indirectly, to the digestive system. Not the brain, not the heart, not the muscles, the gut. The same place where trillions of microbes live. The same place where food enters the body. The same place we usually think of only when discussing digestion. But digestion is only one part of the story. The gut is also a fortress so important that your survival depends on it every moment of every day. To understand why, imagine a national border. Every traveler arriving at an airport passes through checkpoints. Passports are inspected, identities are verified, potential threats are evaluated. Most travelers are allowed through. Some are denied entry. The goal is not to stop everything. The goal is to distinguish friend from foe. The gut faces a similar challenge. Every meal introduces foreign material into the body. Food particles, bacteria, viruses, chemical compounds, environmental contaminants. The digestive system must decide what belongs and what does not. It must absorb nutrients while blocking harmful substances. It must welcome beneficial microbes while controlling dangerous ones. It must remain vigilant without becoming overly aggressive. This balancing act is one of the greatest challenges in biology, and it begins with something called the intestinal barrier. The intestinal barrier is often described as a wall, but that description can be misleading. A wall is passive. The intestinal barrier is anything but passive. It is a living structure, dynamic, intelligent, constantly adapting. A thin layer of specialized cells lines the digestive tract. These cells form a protective boundary between the contents of the gut and the rest of the body. At first glance, this barrier seems fragile. It is astonishingly thin. In some places, only a single cell layer separates trillions of microbes from the bloodstream. Yet despite this apparent vulnerability, the system works remarkably well, most of the time. The intestinal barrier functions like an elite security checkpoint. Useful nutrients pass through, water passes through, beneficial compounds pass through, potentially harmful substances are blocked. The body receives what it needs while minimizing risk. But the barrier does not work alone. Covering its surface is another layer of protection, a mucus shield, a slippery protective coating that helps separate microbial communities from sensitive tissues. Think of it as a buffer zone, a neutral territory between the microbial world and the body's internal environment. Many beneficial microbes live within this region, helping maintain balance, supporting barrier function, participating in immune regulation. Yet even this is only part of the story, because behind the barrier stands an enormous immune network. A network so extensive that scientists often refer to it as the mucosal immune system. The word mucosal simply refers to the moist surfaces lining areas such as the digestive tract. And these surfaces are constantly exposed to the outside world. Every day, immune cells stationed within the gut monitor incoming traffic, evaluating threats, gathering information, making decisions. Some cells act like scouts, others function like intelligence officers. Some produce antibodies, others coordinate broader immune responses. Together, they create one of the most sophisticated defense systems on Earth. What makes this system extraordinary is that it cannot simply attack everything. If it did, eating lunch would become a biological disaster. The immune system must exercise restraint. It must learn tolerance. It must distinguish between dangerous invaders and harmless visitors. Imagine trying to secure a nation's borders while allowing millions of legitimate travelers to enter every day. That is essentially the challenge faced by the gut immune system, and this is where the microbiome becomes critically important. For years, scientists viewed microbes primarily as threats. Bacteria caused infections, viruses caused disease, microorganisms were enemies. But modern research has revealed a much more complex reality. Many microbes are not enemies, many are allies. In fact, beneficial microbes help train the immune system itself. From early life onward, microbial exposure teaches immune cells how to respond appropriately. What should trigger alarm? What should be ignored? What should be tolerated? The microbiome acts almost like an instructor, helping educate immune defenses, helping prevent overreaction, helping maintain balance. Without this education, immune systems can become confused, sometimes too weak, sometimes too aggressive. Both outcomes can be dangerous. An underactive immune system struggles against infection. An overactive immune system can attack harmless substances, or even attack the body's own tissues. Balance becomes everything, and that balance depends heavily on the relationship between the microbiome and the immune system. This relationship extends into another important concept: inflammation. Inflammation often receives negative attention. People hear the word and immediately think of disease, pain, damage, illness. But inflammation itself is not the enemy. Inflammation is a tool, a protective response designed to eliminate threats and support healing. If you cut your finger, inflammation helps initiate repair. If a dangerous pathogen enters the body, inflammation helps coordinate defense. The problem arises when inflammation becomes chronic, persistent, uncontrolled. Instead of protecting the body, it begins harming it. Researchers increasingly believe that disruptions within the gut ecosystem may contribute to inflammatory processes throughout the body. When the intestinal barrier weakens, when microbial balance becomes disturbed, when communication between microbes and immune cells breaks down, inflammatory responses can become dysregulated. The effects may extend far beyond digestion. Because inflammation is not confined to one location, signals generated in the gut can influence distant organs: the liver, the joints, the skin, the brain. The entire body can feel the consequences. This is why scientists often compare the gut to a national border. When the border functions properly, society remains stable. Trade flows smoothly. Threats are identified. Resources move efficiently. Security is maintained. But when the border begins to fail, problems spread rapidly. Confusion emerges. Vulnerability increases. The effects extend far beyond the frontier itself. The same principle applies to the body. When the gut barrier weakens, the consequences rarely remain isolated. The entire organism can suffer. And perhaps that is the most important lesson of this chapter. The microbiome is not merely influencing mood, not merely influencing cravings, not merely influencing digestion. It is helping maintain one of the body's most critical defense systems, a fortress hidden in plain sight. A fortress most people never think about, yet one that protects them every day of their lives. And now we arrive at a troubling realization. Because if the gut truly functions as a biological border, if the microbiome helps maintain that border, if immune balance depends on the health of that ecosystem, then what happens when the ecosystem begins to collapse? What happens when diversity disappears? What happens when beneficial species decline? What happens when modern lifestyles gradually weaken the fortress from within? Because unfortunately, this is not a hypothetical question. The modern world may be conducting a vast experiment on the human microbiome, an experiment involving processed foods, chronic stress, sleep deprivation, environmental change, and widespread antibiotic use. An experiment whose consequences we are only beginning to understand. And the evidence suggests that the forgotten fortress may already be under attack. Imagine standing at the edge of a rainforest. A vast living world stretches beyond the horizon. Thousands of species coexist. Trees compete for sunlight, insects pollinate flowers, birds spread seeds, fungi recycle nutrients, predators regulate populations. Every organism plays a role. Every connection matters. At first glance, the system appears chaotic. But beneath that apparent chaos lies extraordinary balance. A balance built over thousands of years. A balance so intricate that removing even a few species can trigger consequences throughout the entire ecosystem. Now imagine that rainforest slowly disappearing, not through a single catastrophe, not through one dramatic event, but through countless small changes accumulating over time. A tree disappears, then another. A species declines, then another. Diversity shrinks, complexity fades. The ecosystem becomes simpler, poorer, more fragile. Eventually, what remains may still resemble a forest. But something essential has been lost. The resilience is gone. The stability is gone. The hidden strength that once protected the entire system has disappeared. This story is familiar. It has happened in forests around the world. But today, scientists believe a remarkably similar process may be unfolding inside the human body. Not in distant jungles, not in remote wilderness, inside us. Within the invisible ecosystem we call the microbiome. For most of human history, the microbial world inside the gut evolved alongside us. Generation after generation, thousands of species interacting with one another, competing, cooperating, maintaining balance, creating one of the most diverse ecosystems on Earth. But during the last century, something changed. Human lifestyles transformed faster than biology could adapt. The modern world delivered extraordinary benefits: longer life expectancy, improved sanitation, medical advances, technological progress. Yet alongside these achievements came unintended consequences. Consequences that may be reshaping the microbial world within us. Some scientists have begun using a phrase that sounds almost apocalyptic: microbial extinction. Not necessarily the extinction of all microbes. That is impossible. Microorganisms remain everywhere. Instead, they refer to the loss of microbial diversity, the gradual disappearance of species that once played important roles within the human ecosystem, a quiet extinction occurring largely beyond awareness. And unlike extinctions in distant forests, this one may affect every person listening right now. To understand why, we must examine the forces driving this change. The first threat is perhaps the most obvious: ultra-processed food. Walk through a modern supermarket. Bright packaging fills the shelves. Foods engineered for convenience. Foods engineered for shelf life. Foods engineered for flavor. Foods engineered to maximize consumption. Many of these products contain large amounts of refined sugars, refined starches, industrial additives, and highly processed ingredients. They provide calories. But calories alone are not enough to sustain a healthy ecosystem. Remember the microbial city we discussed earlier? Different species require different resources. Many beneficial microbes thrive on dietary fiber, plant compounds, complex carbohydrates, natural diversity. When these resources disappear, certain populations struggle, others dominate. The ecosystem becomes less varied, less balanced, more fragile. Imagine feeding an entire rainforest only one type of plant. Some species would survive, many would not. Diversity would collapse. The same principle applies inside the gut. A narrow dietary environment often supports a narrower microbial environment, and a narrower microbial environment may provide fewer benefits to the host. The second threat is something many people underestimate: chronic stress. Unlike our ancestors, modern humans often experience stress that never truly ends. Work pressures, financial concerns, constant notifications, information overload, endless demands on attention. The human stress response evolved to handle short-term challenges: escape a predator, survive a crisis, recover. But chronic stress creates a very different biological environment. Stress hormones remain elevated, inflammatory signals increase, digestive processes change, gut motility shifts, communication along the gut-brain axis becomes altered. Over time, these changes can influence microbial populations. The ecosystem responds to the environment in which it exists. And a body living in constant stress creates different conditions than a body experiencing periods of recovery and calm. Then comes another surprisingly powerful factor: sleep. Most people think of sleep as something the brain needs, a time for memory consolidation, recovery, dreaming. But sleep influences nearly every system in the body: hormones, metabolism, immune activity, inflammation, and yes, the microbiome. Researchers increasingly find connections between sleep quality and microbial diversity. Poor sleep can disrupt biological rhythms, and microbes, like many living organisms, respond to rhythms. When those rhythms become chaotic, the ecosystem can become disrupted as well. Think about how many people now live: late nights, artificial lighting, irregular schedules, constant stimulation. The modern world often treats sleep as optional. Biology does not, and neither does the microbiome. But perhaps the most dramatic force affecting microbial diversity emerged from one of medicine's greatest achievements: antibiotics. There is no question that antibiotics have saved countless lives. Before their discovery, infections that seem routine today often proved fatal. Antibiotics revolutionized medicine. They remain among the most important medical tools ever developed. Yet every powerful tool comes with trade-offs. Antibiotics do not always distinguish perfectly between harmful bacteria and beneficial ones. When used appropriately, their benefits vastly outweigh the risks. But overuse and misuse can create unintended consequences. Imagine attempting to eliminate invasive plants from a forest by removing everything in sight. The invaders disappear, but so do many native species. The ecosystem survives. Yet it emerges altered. The same thing can happen within the microbiome. After antibiotic treatment, many microbial populations recover. Some recover quickly, others take longer. Some may never fully return. Repeated disruption can gradually reduce diversity. The ecosystem becomes simpler, less resilient, less capable of adapting to future challenges. This is why scientists increasingly focus not only on the presence of microbes, but on diversity itself. Diversity is one of nature's greatest strengths. A diverse ecosystem contains redundancy. If one species declines, others can compensate. If conditions change, some organisms adapt. Complexity creates resilience. We see this principle everywhere: forests, coral reefs, grasslands, financial systems, human societies, and microbial ecosystems. The more diverse the ecosystem, the better it can withstand disruption. The more diversity disappears, the more vulnerable the system becomes. This realization has transformed how researchers think about health. For decades, medicine focused primarily on eliminating threats, destroy pathogens, treat disease, remove harmful influences. Those goals remain essential. But now scientists recognize another objective: protect the ecosystem, preserve diversity, maintain balance. Because health is not merely the absence of enemies, it is the presence of resilience, and resilience often depends on diversity. The frightening part is that microbial diversity may be declining across large populations. Comparisons between traditional societies and highly industrialized populations often reveal significant differences in microbiome composition. People living closer to traditional lifestyles frequently possess greater microbial diversity. More species, more complexity, more ecological richness. Scientists continue investigating exactly what these differences mean. But the pattern itself is difficult to ignore. Something appears to be changing. Something appears to be disappearing. And the consequences may extend far beyond digestion. Remember everything we have explored so far. The microbiome influences chemical signaling. It communicates with the brain. It interacts with the immune system. It helps maintain biological barriers. It participates in countless processes throughout the body. If that ecosystem weakens, every connected system may feel the effects. A less diverse microbiome does not automatically cause disease. The relationship is more complicated than that. But evidence increasingly suggests that reduced diversity is associated with greater vulnerability, less flexibility, less resilience, a body that struggles more when challenges arise. In ecological terms, it is the difference between a thriving rainforest and a depleted landscape. One absorbs shocks, the other breaks under pressure. And perhaps that is the central lesson. A poor ecosystem creates a vulnerable host. A fragile microbial world contributes to a fragile biological world. The health of the organism and the health of the ecosystem cannot be separated. They rise together. They fall together. But as unsettling as this realization may be, an even deeper question now emerges. Because disease is not the most disturbing implication of microbiome science. The most disturbing implication concerns identity. After everything we have learned, the communication networks, the emotional signals, the cravings, the behavioral influences, the immune connections, the ecological interdependence, we are forced to confront a question that moves beyond biology and into philosophy. If so much of what we experience is shaped by organisms living within us, if our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors emerge from a partnership between human cells and microbial communities, then where exactly does the self begin, and where does it end? Because the most unsettling mystery of the microbiome is not what it does to the body. It is what it reveals about who we really are. For thousands of years, human beings have asked the same question: who am I? Civilizations rose and fell searching for an answer. Philosophers dedicated entire lives to it. Religions built vast systems of meaning around it. Scientists approached it through biology, psychology, and neuroscience. Yet despite centuries of investigation, the mystery remains. What exactly is the self? At first, the answer seems obvious. You are your thoughts, your memories, your personality, your experiences, your consciousness, the voice inside your head. The one listening to these words right now, the one who remembers childhood, the one who makes decisions, the one who says I. But the deeper we investigate, the stranger the question becomes, especially after everything we have learned on this journey. Because the science of the microbiome forces us to confront a possibility that would have sounded absurd only a few decades ago. What if some of the experiences we consider deeply personal are not entirely our own? What if emotions are influenced by microbes? What if cravings are influenced by microbes? What if mood is influenced by microbes? What if biological communities hidden inside the body help shape the very experiences we use to define ourselves? Then where exactly does the self begin? And where does it end? Pause for a moment and consider something simple. Imagine you wake up feeling unusually anxious. Nothing dramatic happened. No obvious threat exists. Yet the world feels different. Colors seem duller. Challenges feel larger. Uncertainty feels heavier. You assume the anxiety belongs to you. Of course you do. Who else could it belong to? But what if that emotional state was partially influenced by inflammation? What if inflammation was influenced by the microbiome? What if the microbiome had changed due to sleep, diet, stress, or environmental factors? Would the anxiety still be yours? Most people immediately answer yes, and perhaps they are correct. But notice what happened. The boundary between you and biology suddenly became difficult to identify. Now consider a different scenario. You experience an intense craving, a craving so strong that it dominates your attention. You think about the food repeatedly. You imagine its taste. You feel drawn toward it. Eventually, you give in. Again, the experience feels personal. The desire feels like your own. Yet what if microbial activity helped create biological signals that contributed to that craving? What if the ecosystem influenced the urge? Does that make the craving less yours? Or does it simply expand what we mean by you? These questions lead directly into one of the most famous thought experiments in philosophy, the ship of Theseus. The story originates in ancient Greece. Imagine a wooden ship preserved for centuries. As the ship ages, individual boards begin to rot. To keep the vessel functional, workers replace each damaged board with a new one. One board becomes two, two become 10, 10 become 50. Eventually, every original piece of wood has been replaced. Now comes the question, is it still the same ship? There is no universally accepted answer. Some philosophers say yes, the ship maintained continuity through time. Its identity survived despite material changes. Others argue no. Every original component disappeared. The ship became something entirely new. For centuries, this thought experiment remained a fascinating intellectual puzzle, but modern biology reveals that the human body presents the same dilemma. Almost every component of your body changes over time. Cells die, cells are replaced, proteins are rebuilt, neural connections shift, hormones fluctuate, microbial populations rise and fall. The biological material composing you today differs significantly from the material composing you years ago. Yet you still experience yourself as the same person, the same I, the same observer, the same self. How is that possible? Perhaps identity is not a thing. Perhaps identity is a process, not a static object, but a continuous pattern, a dynamic system maintained through change, a river rather than a statue. The water constantly moves, yet the river remains. This perspective becomes even more interesting when we consider the microbiome. Remember that microbial populations change constantly. Species appear, species decline, communities reorganize, the ecosystem evolves throughout life. In a sense, billions of organisms are continuously entering and leaving the story of your body, yet your sense of self persists. Or does it? Perhaps not as completely as we assume. Think about how different you feel under different conditions. After a great night's sleep, after several nights of poor sleep, after weeks of exercise, after months of inactivity, during periods of connection, during periods of loneliness, under chronic stress, during peaceful moments. The self appears stable from a distance, but up close, it is astonishingly fluid. Thoughts change, emotions change, motivation changes, perception changes. the organism changes. And because the microbiome participates in many of these processes, it becomes difficult to separate human identity from the ecosystem supporting it. This realization touches another ancient philosophical question: free will. Are we truly free, or are our choices determined by forces beyond our awareness? For centuries, philosophers have debated this issue. Some argue that humans possess genuine freedom. Others believe every decision emerges from prior causes: genes, environment, experience, physics, biology. The debate continues today. The microbiome does not solve the problem. In many ways, it complicates it, because it introduces yet another layer of influence. Imagine making a decision. You believe the decision emerged from conscious reasoning, but beneath awareness, countless processes contributed. Genetics influenced brain structure, past experiences shaped preferences, hormones affected emotional state, sleep influenced attention, stress influenced judgment, microbial signals influenced chemistry, neural networks processed information. Only after all of this does conscious awareness experience the final result. The decision feels immediate, simple, personal, yet beneath the surface lies extraordinary complexity. Does this mean free will is an illusion? Not necessarily, but it may mean that freedom operates within a network of influences rather than outside them. You are not separate from biology. You emerge from biology. The self may be less like a king issuing commands and more like a conductor guiding an orchestra. The conductor matters, but so do the musicians. The music emerges from cooperation, not domination. This idea can feel unsettling at first. Many people instinctively resist it. We want to be independent, autonomous, separate, entirely self-directed. The notion that invisible microbes participate in shaping aspects of our experience can feel like a threat to individuality. Yet perhaps the opposite is true. Perhaps it reveals something beautiful. Consider the natural world. No ecosystem exists in isolation. Forests depend on fungi, flowers depend on pollinators, coral reefs depend on symbiotic relationships. Life thrives through cooperation. Interdependence is not a weakness of nature. It is one of nature's greatest strengths. Why should humans be different? Perhaps the mistake was assuming we were ever isolated in the first place. Perhaps the image of the human being as a completely independent individual was never entirely accurate. Perhaps we have always been ecosystems, communities, partnerships, collaborations between human cells and microbial life, between consciousness and biology, between self and environment. The microbiome does not diminish what it means to be human. It expands it. It reveals layers of connection we never knew existed. It suggests that the boundaries of the self may be wider, richer, and more interconnected than we imagined. And this leads us to the most profound realization of all. Maybe human beings have never been singular entities. Maybe we have always been living constellations, complex networks of relationships held together within one body. Not one organism alone, but many forms of life moving forward together. If that idea is true, then perhaps our goal should not be to dominate the invisible world within us, not to wage war against it, not to control every aspect of it, but to learn something far wiser: cooperation. Because if trillions of organisms are helping shape the ecosystem we call the self, then perhaps the path to better health is not about defeating them. Perhaps it is about becoming a better partner. And that realization leads directly to the practical question that matters most. If the second brain is our partner, if the microbiome is part of the story of who we are, then how do we care for it? How do we nourish it? How do we rebuild balance in a world that constantly disrupts it? Because the next chapter is where philosophy meets action, and where understanding becomes transformation. After everything we have explored, you might be feeling two very different emotions: wonder and concern. Wonder at the realization that an entire hidden universe exists within you. Concern at the realization that this universe can be disrupted by modern lifestyles, by poor diet, by chronic stress, by sleep deprivation, by the countless pressures of daily life. And if you feel that concern, it is understandable. Because once we understand how deeply the microbiome influences the body, a natural question emerges. What can we do about it? How do we protect this hidden ecosystem? How do we strengthen it? How do we restore balance when it has been disturbed? Fortunately, this chapter is not about fear. It is about hope. Because one of the most encouraging discoveries in microbiome science is that ecosystems can recover. Not instantly, not perfectly, but they can recover. Nature is remarkably resilient when given the right conditions. Think about a damaged forest. If the soil remains healthy and the environment improves, new growth begins. Seeds sprout, plants return, animals follow. Life slowly rebuilds itself. The same principle often applies to the ecosystem inside the human body. The goal is not to wage war against microbes. The goal is not to sterilize the gut. The goal is not to dominate nature. The goal is to create conditions in which balance can emerge. Because healthy ecosystems are rarely controlled, they are cultivated. And the first step in cultivating the second brain begins with something surprisingly simple: food. Not food as calories, not food as a reward, not food as a source of guilt, food as ecological influence. Every meal is an environmental event. Every bite changes conditions inside the gut. Every dietary choice helps determine which microbial populations thrive and which decline. This means that feeding yourself is also feeding an ecosystem. And one of the most important resources that ecosystem needs is fiber. Fiber has a strange reputation in modern nutrition. People know it is healthy. They know they should probably consume more of it. Yet few people think about why. The reason becomes much more interesting when viewed through the lens of microbiome science. Humans cannot fully digest many forms of dietary fiber. To us, fiber often appears nutritionally insignificant. But to many microbes, fiber is a feast. It provides fuel, energy, resources. When beneficial microbial populations receive adequate fiber, they produce compounds that support gut health and help maintain balance within the ecosystem. In other words, some of the foods that seem least exciting to us may be extraordinarily valuable to the organisms that support us. Vegetables, legumes, whole grains, fruits, seeds. These foods are not simply feeding the body, they are feeding the biological community within the body. And communities thrive when resources are diverse. This brings us to another powerful concept: variety. Imagine trying to support a rainforest using only one species of plant. The ecosystem would become limited. Diversity would decline. Resilience would weaken. The same principle applies to the microbiome. Different microbes benefit from different nutrients. Different plants contain different compounds. Different foods support different ecological niches. This is one reason researchers often emphasize eating a wide variety of plant-based foods. Not because any single vegetable possesses magical properties, but because diversity supports diversity. Colorful foods are particularly interesting in this regard. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple. The pigments responsible for these colors often contain unique compounds that interact with biological systems in different ways. A colorful plate frequently reflects nutritional diversity, and nutritional diversity helps create ecological diversity. The microbiome responds not only to quantity, it responds to variety. The more diverse the environment, the more opportunities exist for a rich ecosystem to flourish. Then there are fermented foods. For thousands of years, humans consumed fermented foods long before anyone understood microbes. Yogurt, kimchi, sauerkraut, kefir, miso. Traditional fermented foods appear throughout cultures across the world. Today, researchers continue exploring how these foods interact with the microbiome. The science is still evolving, but one idea remains consistent. Fermentation represents a partnership between humans and microbial life, a collaboration that predates modern civilization. These foods remind us that microbes are not merely potential threats. Many have been our companions throughout history. The goal is not to eliminate microbial life. The goal is to cultivate healthy relationships with it. Yet food is only one piece of the puzzle, because ecosystems are influenced by more than nutrients. They are influenced by environment, and one of the most important environmental factors affecting the microbiome is sleep. Sleep is often treated as a luxury, something to sacrifice when life becomes busy, something that can be postponed, something that can be compensated for later. Biology disagrees. Sleep is not passive, it is active maintenance, a period during which countless systems perform essential work: hormonal regulation, immune function, memory consolidation, cellular repair, metabolic balance. The microbiome participates in these rhythms as well. Many biological processes follow daily cycles. When sleep becomes irregular, those cycles can become disrupted. Imagine a city where electricity turns on and off unpredictably. Traffic patterns collapse. Communication suffers. productivity declines. The same principle applies inside the body. Consistent sleep helps create a stable environment, and stable environments support healthy ecosystems. Then there is stress, perhaps the most underestimated ecological force in modern life. When discussing stress, people often focus on psychology, worry, anxiety, pressure. But stress is also biology. It changes hormone levels, it alters digestion, it affects inflammation, it influences immune activity. And because all these systems interact with the microbiome, stress inevitably affects the ecosystem as well. This does not mean eliminating stress completely. That would be impossible. Stress is part of life. The goal is recovery, balance, periods of calm that allow biological systems to return to equilibrium, meditation, time in nature, meaningful social connection, breathing practices, creative activities, moments of stillness. These are not merely psychological comforts. They may help shape the biological environment in which the microbiome exists. Once again, the lesson is ecological. Healthy ecosystems require stability, not perfection, stability. Movement also plays an important role. Humans evolved in motion, walking, climbing, exploring, working with the body rather than against it. Modern lifestyles often replace movement with prolonged sitting, hours spent indoors, hours spent stationary. Yet physical activity influences far more than muscles. Exercise affects circulation, metabolism, inflammation, hormonal signaling, and emerging evidence suggests it may also support microbial diversity. The exact mechanisms remain under investigation, but the broader message is becoming increasingly clear. Movement helps create conditions that support overall biological health, and healthy biology supports healthy ecosystems. Perhaps the most important lesson in all of this is that there is no single miracle solution, no magical supplement, no perfect food, no secret hack. That is not how ecosystems work. Forests are not sustained by one tree. Coral reefs are not sustained by one species. Healthy ecosystems emerge through relationships, balance, diversity, cooperation. The microbiome follows the same rules. This understanding changes the way we think about health itself. For years, health was often framed as a battle. Fight disease, defeat symptoms, attack problems. Sometimes that language is necessary. Medicine saves lives. Treatment matters. But microbiome science introduces another perspective. Health is not merely combat. Health is stewardship. It is caring for an ecosystem, supporting resilience, creating conditions in which life can flourish. The goal is not complete control. Complete control is an illusion. No one controls a rainforest, no one controls an ocean, no one controls a galaxy, and no one fully controls the microbiome. What we can do is influence conditions. We can support balance. We can encourage resilience. We can help the ecosystem thrive. And perhaps that is the most hopeful realization of all. You do not need to control every microbe. You do not need to manage every biological process. You do not need to become the ruler of the invisible world within you. You simply need to become a good caretaker, a good partner, a good steward of the ecosystem that has been supporting you since the day you were born. Because the second brain is not an enemy. The microbiome is not an invader. It is part of the story of your existence, a living community that has traveled beside you every moment of your life. And that understanding leads us to the final and most important conclusion of our entire journey, a conclusion that reaches beyond biology, beyond medicine, beyond neuroscience, a conclusion about what it truly means to be human, because the greatest lesson of the microbiome may not be about health at all. It may be about connection. At the beginning of this journey, we started with a simple question, a question that seemed almost absurd. What if some of the feelings you experience every day do not originate entirely in your brain? What if the butterflies in your stomach, the unexplained anxiety, the midnight craving, the strange intuition that appears without warning, are part of a conversation happening deep inside your body? At first, it sounded like science fiction, a mysterious idea, a curious possibility. But as we traveled deeper into the hidden universe within you, something extraordinary began to emerge. The story was never really about digestion. It was never just about bacteria. And it was never simply about health. It was a story about connection, a story about identity, a story about what it truly means to be alive. Together, we descended into a world most people never think about, a world hidden in darkness, a world invisible to the naked eye, a world containing trillions of living organisms, an entire ecosystem carried within you every moment of your life. We discovered that you are not merely a human body, you are also a habitat, a living planet, a biological universe supporting countless forms of life. We explored the astonishing scale of that universe, the unimaginable number of microorganisms living inside you, the immense diversity of species, the vast genetic library they collectively contain, a hidden civilization so large that, compared to it, many cities on Earth seem small. Then we uncovered something even more surprising. The gut possesses its own nervous system, a network of hundreds of millions of neurons stretching throughout the digestive tract. A system so sophisticated that scientists began calling it the second brain. Not because it thinks exactly like the brain in your skull, but because it processes information, responds to its environment, coordinates complex activity, and participates in the story of who you are. From there, we followed the pathways connecting these two worlds: the vagus nerve, the biological communication highway, the living bridge between the gut and the brain. We learned that information does not flow only from the brain downward. Much of it flows upward. The gut constantly reporting, the brain constantly listening, a conversation unfolding every second of every day. Then we entered the realm of chemistry, the invisible language through which the body speaks to itself. Serotonin, dopamine, GABA, neuroactive compounds, chemical messengers influencing mood, motivation, sleep, and emotional well-being. We discovered something that would have sounded impossible not long ago. Many of these processes are intimately connected to the gut, to the ecosystem, to the microscopic world hidden beneath conscious awareness. The story grew stranger, and perhaps a little unsettling. We explored experiments suggesting that microbial communities may influence behavior, not through intelligence, not through conscious intention, but through chemistry, through biological signaling, through subtle changes in the environment in which the brain operates. The question became unavoidable. If microbes can influence mood, if they can influence stress responses, if they can influence behavior, how much of what we experience truly belongs to us alone? Then came one of the most relatable discoveries of all: food, cravings, appetite. The moments when logic seems powerless against desire. The moments when a single craving dominates attention. The moments when we feel pulled toward certain foods without fully understanding why. We learned that the microbiome may participate in those experiences as well, not as a puppet master, not as a hidden dictator, but as part of the biological conversation influencing what feels appealing, what feels satisfying, what feels irresistible. The ecosystem was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. And then we reached the forgotten fortress, the immune system, the gut barrier, the biological border standing between your internal world and the outside environment. We discovered that the microbiome is not merely a passenger, it is a protector, a partner helping maintain balance within one of the body's most important defense systems. The health of the ecosystem and the health of the host became inseparable. One depends upon the other, as all ecosystems do. But every great journey eventually encounters danger, and ours was no exception. We witnessed the silent extinction unfolding inside modern humans, the gradual loss of microbial diversity, the shrinking of biological ecosystems shaped over thousands of years, ultra-processed foods, chronic stress, sleep deprivation, excessive antibiotic exposure, modern life itself becoming an ecological force, a force capable of reshaping the hidden universe within us. The image was sobering. A rainforest slowly losing its species, a coral reef losing its complexity, an ecosystem becoming less resilient, less adaptable, more vulnerable, and then the journey took an unexpected turn. We arrived at philosophy, at perhaps the oldest question humanity has ever asked. Who am I? If emotions are influenced by biology, if cravings are influenced by biology, if behavior emerges from countless interacting systems, then where exactly does the self reside? We examined the ship of Theseus, the ancient puzzle of identity, a ship rebuilt plank by plank until none of the original material remains. Is it still the same ship? The question suddenly felt personal, because the human body is constantly changing. Cells change, proteins change, neural connections change, microbial communities change, yet somehow the sense of self persists. Or perhaps the self is not a thing at all. Perhaps it is a process, a pattern, a continuously evolving relationship between countless parts, a living symphony rather than a solitary instrument. And finally, we discovered something hopeful. The microbiome is not an enemy to conquer, not a machine to control, not a problem to solve. It is an ecosystem to nurture, an environment to support, a partnership to respect. Through diverse foods, fiber, fermented foods, sleep, movement, stress management, we can help create conditions in which balance thrives, not through domination, but through stewardship. And now we arrive at the end of our journey, or perhaps more accurately, the beginning of a new way of seeing yourself. Because the greatest lesson of microbiome science may have nothing to do with bacteria. It may have everything to do with connection. For centuries, humans imagined themselves as separate from nature, observers standing outside the natural world, independent beings looking in from a distance. Yet the deeper science looks, the more that illusion dissolves. You are not separate from nature. You are nature. Every breath connects you to the atmosphere. Every meal connects you to ecosystems across the planet. Every heartbeat depends on ancient biological processes billions of years old. And every moment of consciousness emerges from countless invisible relationships unfolding within your body. The story of life has never been a story of isolation. It has always been a story of connection. The forest survives through connection. The ocean survives through connection. The planet survives through connection. And so do you. Every thought, every feeling, every memory, every dream, every moment of awareness, all emerge from a vast network of relationships working together in ways we are only beginning to understand. Perhaps that is why the microbiome feels so fascinating. It reminds us of something ancient, something we once knew but gradually forgot. That life is not built from independence. Life is built from interdependence. And maybe the greatest scientific discovery is not that trillions of microbes live inside you. Maybe the greatest discovery is that you and they have never truly been separate. Not for a single moment, not for a single breath, not for a single heartbeat. Perhaps the greatest secret hidden within the second brain is not that another world exists inside you. It is that the boundary between that world and you was never as clear as it seemed. And the next time you feel a sudden craving, the next time you experience an unexpected intuition, the next time you hear that quiet whisper rising from somewhere deep inside your body, pause for a moment. Listen carefully and ask yourself a question. Is it your intuition speaking? Or is it the echo of an entire universe living within you? If you enjoyed this journey into one of the most astonishing discoveries in modern science, please take a moment to support the channel. Like this video. Subscribe for more explorations into the scientific mysteries quietly shaping our everyday lives. And if one idea from today's journey stayed with you, whether it was the second brain, the microbiome, free will, identity, or the hidden connections between mind and body, share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective may inspire the next conversation. And if you know someone who would enjoy exploring the invisible universe living inside all of us, share this video with them as well. Until next time, stay curious, because the deepest mysteries in the universe may not be waiting among the stars. They may already be living within you.